Greetings, Pagan Perspective viewers. My name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. This week, we're getting back to basics. This week, we're talking about what it's like when we start to feel stuck, which is something that we've talked about a lot before, but in this case, more specifically, do we ever feel like we kind of just want to start over and like go back to the beginning and remind ourselves how we started, why we started doing this in the first place, and then also talking about what getting back to basics means for us. What do we consider the basics and the foundation of our practice? We also have a viewer submitted question this week from Rosemoonlooms, because at the end of 2018, we had so many topic suggestions that we were able to schedule the entire year of 2019 topics all at once at the beginning of 2019. So we didn't have room to put in any new topics that were asked. However, some of you did send in topic suggestions during 2019, knowing that we wouldn't be able to get to them right away. Thank you for doing so, because we will be able to start getting to them now in 2020. But one of the questions was from Rosemoonlooms, and they asked, since we are booked so far ahead, because again, this was knowing that we were full for 2019, they asked this, since you're booked so far ahead, can you suggest another way to get a topic addressed on YouTube by any pagans who are interested in sharing? Thanks for any suggestions. So I actually want to start with Rose's question. This is a great question. I know that there have been other pagan collab channels that have started and stopped throughout the years. I believe there are still one or two in existence, and so maybe you could seek those out. Or my first thought was actually not even about other collabs. My first thought was individuals, because there are so many individual pagans and witches on YouTube sharing about their personal practices. I know it's a little less convenient because you can't just when you ask here, you get 5 or 6 different perspectives right away, and we've already kind of tried to have different backgrounds and different paths to talk to you about. But my first thought was going to various people's channels and leave a comment or leave a suggestion and ask a question, and if they feel like they want to respond in a video, they might appreciate that suggestion. I know for myself, on my personal channel, I have never said that I, quote, accept requests, because that can be a lot. But it's always been the case over the last 10 years on my personal channel that if someone sends me a question, if it's a sincere question and I feel like I can answer it, I write them back. Or if I feel like, this is a really great question that I'd like to be able to respond to in a more extensive way, or, this is something that other people have asked me about too, and you're kind of like the 3rd person or the 5th person to ask this, so maybe I should just go ahead and make a video. That's always been a way that I've gotten ideas for videos. So my first thought would be going and finding channels of people whose opinions you value. Maybe seek out people who say that they are from different pagan paths who already talk about their path, and just see if they're willing to accept a suggestion for a video. But I would never say I want you to make this video, because it's also really helpful if they want to reply to your comment in the comments section, if they want to message you back, whatever. Some people accept video requests, some people don't. So I would not want to assume that or make them feel like they have to do a video about a certain thing just because I said so. And if they can't answer the question, hopefully they would just say, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. Maybe they know other people who can. For me, if people have questions about druidry, I pretty much point them to my friend at Esoteric Moment, Danny Lang, who used to be one of our Pagan Perspective members here. Danny is my go-to druid for a lot of things. I also have another personal friend who I met through the internet, who is part of OBOD as well, so I ask them druid-related questions. You can also go to organizations and things like that. If I have traditional Wicca questions, I tend to go to my pal Thorn Mooney, who actually has written a book about it and is a 3rd degree and a coven leader. So there's just various people that throughout my years on YouTube I have gotten to know and consider friends, and I consider them each to have their own kind of area of expertise. And so if I have a question about something, I ask them, or if one of my viewers asks me a question that's really more in one of their areas of expertise, I might either ask them and then pass their answer on to that person so that I know what they said as well, because especially if I'm like, that's a really good question, I would like to know, I might ask them myself and then pass it on. Or I might just say, I know a really great person you can ask, and send them to Danny or send them to Thorn or send them to whoever else I already know. It would depend on the topic or the question as far as like individual suggestions, but there's a couple of them for you if you have questions about druidry or traditional Wicca specifically, like coven-based, lineaged, initiatory Wicca. Those are a couple of suggestions for you. But yeah, there's tons of people making videos about paganism and witchcraft on YouTube, so whether it's other collabs or individuals, I think it's never a bad thing to simply ask a question, and if they don't want to answer it or can't answer it or don't want to make a video on it or whatever, we can't expect that work from people, but I don't think there's usually much harm in just asking and see if they'll do it. See if they are interested. So yeah, wanted to start with that one. Now, the topic of going back to basics, sometimes wanting to start over, I will read you how it's actually worded, which of course is also going to be in the description of this video as always. Every so often, it can be nice to get back to basics and remember how we started or why we started doing something in the first place. What do you consider the basic elements of your practice? What is the foundation or core of your practice from which you build on the rest? Do you ever find yourself straying or getting off track and feel a need to go back to basics? How do you identify those times, and how do you go about doing that? So, for me, going back to basics, remembering how we started, why we started, I feel like I do that pretty regularly, like at least once a year. I tend to actually do my kind of yearly check-ins around the summer solstice, which in the northern hemisphere is in June, so it's just recently passed because we're at the end of June now. And that's usually when I do my year-long or like year ahead readings for myself, card readings, tarot or oracle. And I tend to do a little bit of journaling at least once a month, but a lot of the time that's just kind of catching up on my life, so tends to be more like once a year, maybe twice a year, that I do kind of a check-in of like, where am I with my spiritual practice? What have I been doing? I might actually go back through the entries that I've been writing in my journal and see what was I really most focused on. So that's usually around the solstices, now that I think about it, because I tend to do the check-in at the summer solstice, and then winter solstice feels like a good time for that too, for me personally. So checking in regularly and kind of noting my own personal progress is something that I do regularly. Lately, I feel like I've been doing it even more often, because as I find myself feeling like I have strayed or gotten off track, I notice it because I feel different. I notice a change in my energy, my patterns of what I do change. I might notice, like during the pandemic, I've been having trouble reading, so it might be something like, oh, I'm having trouble focusing on this thing that I normally don't have trouble with. Or it might be noticing that I am not having as much desire or need to do certain things that I normally really like to do. And for me, that's in large part a result of my anxiety and depression, because that's some of how it manifests for me, is not having any desire or motivation to do the things that I normally would love to do. But that can also be a clue for me that I have been letting my practice slide. Hydrate. I also have insomnia on and off, so it might be if I notice that I am all of a sudden having a lot more trouble sleeping again, because it comes and goes, but if it comes back, I check in with myself and I'm like, okay, why? What is going on that is resulting in me having a resurgence in the insomnia? Or the opposite, if I find that all of a sudden I'm sleeping a lot more, I'm sleeping a lot more easily, that to me also says, what's out of balance here? Because I'm just kind of tossing between two extremes. And so anything like that can be a clue for me. And again, you know, it's not just because I haven't done ritual lately, it's because of anxiety or depression or insomnia or whatever, but those things can also be exacerbated by other things. They can also be helped by spending some time in my practice. So whatever is the personal cue for you, it's going to be different for everybody. I can't speak for your life. But for me, you know, there are just certain things that I notice when I start feeling ungrounded. I don't really know how else to describe that, but I start kind of feeling lightheaded and almost dizzy, and I feel like when I'm walking around that I'm not fully present in my body. Those types of feelings are clues for me that, guess what, I haven't grounded recently. You know, I haven't done some basic things that I do consider basics in my practice. I've been letting them slide. So that brings us to the other part of the question, which is, what do I consider basic elements in my practice? What do I consider the foundation or core of my practice from which I build the rest onto it? I have done a video talking about a book on my personal channel. It's the Elements of Magic book from the reclaiming tradition of witchcraft. It was edited by Gade Parma and Jane Meredith, but had more than 30 different authors and reclaiming witches and teachers contributing pieces to the book. So it's kind of an anthology. But I did a review video about that on my personal channel, CuteWitch772, and that's relevant to this because that book is considered the foundational practices or the core elements, some of the core elements of the reclaiming tradition. And so those are some of the things that I think of when I think of what is core to my personal practice, literally working with the elements. And not just since I became involved with reclaiming in the past few years, relatively, but since I started my practice as a preteen, I worked with the elements: earth, air, fire, water, spirit. And not everyone does. Not all pagans do. Sorry if the wind is like cutting out the audio or anything. I hope not. But not all witches and pagans work with the elements. But I do, and I always have. And so that is something that, you know, on pretty much, depending on what it's for, but pretty much every altar that I've ever made for devotional use or for a Sabbath celebration or other type of ritual or whatever, I always have representations of the elements. I always honor and acknowledge the elements. I always have them present in some way that is a conscious acknowledgement, because of course the elements are present all the time. They are present everywhere around me right now, around all of us at all times. They are present in the natural world outside our bodies, and they are also present within our bodies. And that is, you could say, a foundational core belief of my path and my practice as well. But so what I mean by acknowledging their presence is not just knowing, oh, they're always here, but more formally acknowledging them, you know, welcoming them to my circle, thanking them for always being present in our lives. And that's nice to do for other people too. You know, there's people are constantly doing things for us, being there for us in our lives, and we might take it for granted because they're always there and they're just always doing the thing. But if they stopped doing it, we would notice, you know. If one of the elements stopped being a thing, we'd notice. there would be some repercussions of that. So I just think it's nice to consciously acknowledge the role that the elements play in our lives. And some other things that are foundational or core to my practice are the idea of balance, the idea of trying to keep a balance, and I've said many times before in videos that to me balance is not stasis. Balance is knowing that sometimes you will dip a little to one extreme and then maybe you go back the other way a little bit to that extreme, but you're juggling it and you're finding that balance. You know, it might mean there's a little wobble. Balance is not stasis. Balance is not stagnation. So for me, I guess you could say growth is also part of that for me, because I don't want to be stagnant. So if I notice that there's a time in my life where I feel stagnant, I feel stuck, that tells me I am not doing something that is foundational to my belief. You know, I'm letting myself stagnate instead of growing in, you know, whatever direction that might be. So balance, working with the elements, being present in my body. I mentioned before, if I feel like I'm not, that's a clue to me that something's off. So basic kind of body work, breath work, taking care of my physical body. I consider myself an earth-based or nature-based practitioner, so that's also core for me, is honoring and acknowledging and seeking to be in tune with, harmonious with, seeking to benefit and not harm the earth, the literal earth, and also all beings on it. That's pretty core for me as well. And yeah, then I could start to name some other things that more recently have become more important to me and all this, but if I'm really thinking of back to basics, for me that's going back to the earth, going back to nature, going back to natural cycles, the sun and the moon, and our natural cycles as animals as well. Other things beyond that I consider core to my practice now are things like feminism, inclusivity, queer and trans affirming spaces, social justice, things like that. Those are all core to my practice now. But when I think about going back to basics, I think about the elements. I think about the sun and the moon. I think about going outside and walking on the earth, or sitting or laying on the earth. I think of grounding. I think of seeking balance. I think of caring for myself, caring for my community, caring for the world. So my community being my local community and global community, and then also the world as a whole, the multiverse. I could go on. So yeah, I do often feel like I've got to go back to basics. We've got to go back and re-strengthen those foundational practices, remind ourselves of what at the very core is important to us. And so for me, that includes a lot of things. It is inclusive, intersectional. So wording it as things that are vitally important to me in my practice versus like basic magical practices, that's a very different thing. Basic magical practices, I think of grounding, I think of elements. Things that are vitally important to me, I think of intersectionality and social justice and being queer and trans affirming and anti-racist and all sorts of things, right? So yeah, breath work, taking deep breaths, centering in my being, but also then decentering myself, because in my communities, not everything is about me. You know, that balance of centering myself and decentering myself. Balance. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for watching and or listening to this video. If you want to answer this question for yourself, you can make a video about this on your personal channel if you want to. Just like mention that it's a pagan perspective topic and set it up as like you're doing a video response type of thing. But you are absolutely welcome to do these topics on your own channel if you're looking for an idea, or if you hear us talking about something and you feel like you really have something that you want to say, or you just want to share your perspective, you can do that. You are included in this. You are allowed to do that. You don't need my permission, but I'll give you my permission if you feel like you need it. You don't just have to listen to us, you can also talk about your perspective. And then people who are looking for questions to be answered by other people can find your video too. So yeah, do that if you like, or you can just leave your thoughts in the comments, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.